Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order this Tuesday, November 9th, the meeting of the Winnebago County Board. Tonight's special presentation of colors by the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. Board Member Jim Webster, would you please provide invocation and lead our Pledge of Allegiance?
Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together tonight. Trusting in your guidance and your proper decisions. Thank you for protecting law enforcement, first responders, and military. Finally, thank you for all the veterans and decisions. Praise God.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Over. Ready, step. Thank you. Are there any agenda announcements? Mr. Thompson, thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Clerk Gummow to call roll. Would you do that for us, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Start with Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado. Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Butita. Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers. Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. McDonald. Mr. Chairman, 16 board members present, 4 absent.
We do have a quorum. Can I enter a motion to allow Chairman Shirelli, Angela Fellers, and Board Member Dorothy Red to attend via Zoom? Got a motion by Mr. Hoffman, a second by Ms. Gorel. All those in favor? Do we have any opposed? Seeing no opposition, enter all those present in favor of that motion. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call forward Fred Wescott. Mr. Wescott, can you step forward, please? Thank you. Fred Wescott has been a Winnebago County board member since 2003. His dedication to our community has been outstanding, but so has been his commitment to honoring our local veterans. Fred's other passion is woodworking, and while he's made numerous signs and crafts for his own home, no doubt his most impressive creations to date are the more than 2,000 personalized wooden plaques he's designed for local veterans. I have one myself. This labor of love perhaps comes from his father, who served in the Marines and the Army, reminding him to always thank a veteran. Fred, we are privileged to have you not only as a county board member, but as an upstanding member of our community. These are words of Chairman Shirelli. It is my honor, and it's also my honor as well, to present the Chairman's Service Excellence Award to Fred Wescott. In Board Chairman's own words, on this plaque, the Chairman's Excellence Award, it says, I, Joseph Shirelli, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, hereby recognize Fred Wescott for his many years of outstanding service to Winnebago County as a Winnebago County board member and also as a woodworker, using his talents to honor local veterans. This award acknowledges his unwavering dedication, compassion, and sustained commitment to making sure our heroes are never forgotten. Fred Wescott represents the very best values of our community and has served as a great example of what our residents deserve in their public servants. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, sir. We have a number of organizations in Winnebago County assisting local veterans. And with that, several community members behind those organizations committing their life to making sure our vets are never forgotten. We'd like to recognize them here tonight to explain a little bit about their work and why it is so important to them to do what they do. I'd like to call forward Mark Finnegan from Vets Roll. Is Mark here? Nick Parnello from the Operation Fallen Flags. Eric Willard of the Veterans Drop-In Center. Mark, while we wait for them to come up, if you can just step forward and tell the board and everybody here a little bit about what you guys do.
Thank you. It's an honor to be included in this group, and congratulations to Fred. It's a very much deserved recognition. Our Vets Roll program, we've been sidelined here the last 2 years because of the COVID, but we stayed involved with the community, celebrating landmark birthdays at 95, 99, 100 and up. We do a lot of different community events. It just never stops. And you see the flags around the Culver's restaurants in the area right now, or the Texas Roadhouse. This weekend at Sports Score, we'll have flags down there. Those are all different things that we're involved in with Vets Roll to make sure that our first responders and our veterans are just never forgotten for their sacrifices. And we're planning ahead for May 22nd to the 25th next year. We currently have had 2,000 veterans take our trip free of charge. And from 37 different states, they've come here to Winnebago County to go on this trip. So God willing, we're going to do it again. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be here tonight because my daughter's in labor. And but it looks like she's going to hold off till tomorrow morning. So, but thank you all, and God bless our veterans. That's all there is to it.
Nick Pernello, come on up, sir. Good to have you here. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm really honored to be here, and I just have to say that, we're presented this honor, but I've seen the miracle of so many men and women through so many years that have done so much to make the things that we do possible. This Operation Fallen Flags and Miss Glory truck, which she couldn't be here tonight, she's out in the parking lot, but Miss Glory idea has really worked out well, not only to connect with our younger vets. The suicide rate among our young vets is real high, both the gals and the guys. And we had a high suicide rate for the Vietnam era, I think some 67,000. And so when we saw those numbers come up for the young vets, we wanted to do something. And it was a whole bunch of guys that got together and through the years now have made it possible so we can try to connect with younger vets and have a door open, have a place for them to talk to the older war vets and help them out when we can. I want to honor all the vets that are part of the county board, especially a dear old friend. We go back too far, but Joe Hoffman, who was there for some other groups that we started years ago. And I hear there's another Marine. Well, I'll tell you, we don't let too many Marines in, they take over right away. So, but I'd like to, if I may, I found this years ago, and it's always touched me in describing what American veterans are all about. And if I may, in case we find ourselves starting to believe all the anti-American sentiment and negativity, we should remember the English's Prime Minister Tony Blair's words during a recent interview, where when asked by one of his parliamentary members why he believes so much in America, he said this: "The simple way to take measure of a country is to look at how many people want in and how many want out. Only two defining forces have ever offered to die for you. One was Jesus Christ, and the other was the American soldiers." So, God bless our soldiers, and it's such a blessing to be a part of that distinct group of men and women that have done so much for our country and those that we've lost. So I hope we have services out at the LZ Peace Memorial, 11 o'clock on Thursday. Love to have you come out. If you get there early, we even got a donut and a coffee for you. God bless. Thank you.
Mr. Willard. Yes, sir. Please come on up. Thanks for coming.
I've known these guys for a while because they help us a lot. And when we mentioned the flags were going out to Sports Score on Saturday, that's because at the Veterans Drop-In Center, that's our annual main fundraiser, and that will take place Saturday. And it always impresses me to drive into the park and see the flags lining everything. It's just touching. By the way, since this is being recorded, anybody that's not in this room, I'm much taller and thinner than I appear on the screen. I'm told the screen adds 20 pounds, pizza adds 30 pounds, so you figure the math. I am Eric Willard, the call myself the happenstance executive director of the Veterans Drop-In Center. I'm here because our founder and champion of providing love and care for all veterans in our region unexpectedly passed away in June. Many of you knew Pat Ambrose, who was a Red Cross leader of homeless services for decades. She founded the center upon her retirement. And as a volunteer and worker at the center, I agreed when Pat asked me to assume her role if anything ever happened to her. Of course, I thought she'd live forever, but she did not. She was at work one day and gone the next. As a Vietnam veteran, I answered the call to humbly take her baton and carry it forward in the relay of life. Our story at the center is the story of veterans and their families. The story is a collection of the stories of each veteran who enters our doors, hoping for guidance in overcoming the difficulties they face when returning from service, adapting to their new environments, or helping each other with voices of camaraderie, care, and respect. One recent veteran came to us. By the way, I'm a storyteller, so this minute's worth is how I express things. And I don't have the memories of these guys, so I have to write it down. One recent veteran came to us when he moved here from elsewhere last month and needed a roof over his head, a job, clothes, and a meal. He got a job and asked if we had a bike he could use to get to work. The Facebook posting of his need was answered by 12 people, and within an hour, we gave him a bike from a wonderful donor. Anyone thinks that Rockford doesn't have good people in it should just pay attention to all the organizations that help folks in Rockford, because they get it from the good people in the community throughout the county, not just Rockford. We connected him with other veteran service organizations who helped him with a place to live and additional assistance he didn't know he needed. We're open 5 days a week from noon to 6, providing services such as showers, laundry, neck massages every Tuesday. It's wonderful. Haircuts, computer classes, job search preparation, and guidance on how to obtain veterans benefits and support from the many other organizations in our area. We also provide items such as clothing, toiletries, food, and any other things that individuals and organizations donate or purchase for those purposes. We're dependent on donations and volunteers to continue our work, and we encourage everyone to be kind to each other and to call us at any time or find us on Facebook for searching for the Veterans Drop-In Center in Rockford. Thank you for the chance to share our story. I am Eric Willard, at your service. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Thanks, guys.
Well, it is my honor to preside over tonight's county board meeting in the chairman's absence. It is particularly special as a veteran to honor fellow veterans this evening. I am proud to have served my country with both the U.S. Army and the United States Marine Corps. We have a number of board members and Winnebago County staff present tonight who have served for our country. If you could, please stand so we can recognize you and thank you for your service. Okay. Public hearings. Mr. Chair.
There are no public hearings.
Mr. Thompson, public participation, sir.
I believe.
I have two on my
Yes.
schedule here.
Yep.
Okay, the first one, first public speaker tonight. I have to read the For public comment, total time for public comment will be limited to 21 minutes. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Visual aids are not permitted, but handouts may be provided to staff for distribution. Speakers may not address personnel matters pending or threaten litigation or zoning matters which are pending before the Zoning Board of Appeals or the County Board. Personal attacks or inappropriate language will not be permitted. The chairperson will determine the sequential order of speakers. If a particular item is deemed by the chairperson to be controversial, the chairperson shall strive to allow all sides an equal amount of time. Our first speaker tonight is Mr. L.C. Wilson.
I've got 3 reasons why I'm here tonight. The first being that the last time I was here, I was supposed to tell Tim Neighbors, thank you for speaking at the engagement that I thanked Fred and the chairman to speak at. And I talked to Tim about it, and he told me that you shouldn't have to come back and do this. I said, yes, I am, because that's who I am. That's L.C. Wilson. The second thing I want to talk about is the person that's already been honored, Mr. Fred Wescott. I approached Fred some months ago, and I asked Fred, I said, Fred, I'm part of a veteran stand down that we had the 29th of October. I asked him if he could help me out with something to give to veterans. I gave him a number, I said 10. And he said, yeah, I'll do, can I say it? Anything you want, Elsie. But I thought it was comical, but that's just Fred. He and I have a relationship like that. Fred, thank you so much for presenting to 10 veterans that showed up at the veteran stand down a plaque with their military service and years of service. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And the last reason, before I get to the last reason, I missed one. And that's, Mr. Webster, you did well. I wasn't here for your back, but you had your own back tonight. You prayed a good prayer. The last thing I want to talk about is what has been mentioned, and that's the veterans. Thank you if you're in the county board like Mr. Booker and L.C. Wilson, and others if you're in this audience. Thank you for your service. And lastly, I'll say this to all of us that are veterans. Tomorrow is your day.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Reverend Dotson. Is Reverend Dotson here? Thank you. There he is. It's tough to recognize with the hat and the mask. And
the Bible in the book of James. My brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. For if there come into your assembly a man with a gold ring in goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile arraignment, you have respect of him that has on the fine clothes, and say unto him, sit thou here. And say to the poor man, sit there under my footstool. God has chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to them that love him. But you have despised the poor. Do not the rich men oppress you and draw you before judgment seats? If you fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, you do well. Again, I quote what I've quoted before. J.P. Morgan Chase Bank is the largest bank in the United States, one of the largest in the world. It released a statistic about 15 days ago that says the median net worth of white households in the United States is $188,000. The next group are the Latinos, $36,000. That's a big gap. At the bottom are Black people with $24,000 from 188 to 24. That's just below the poverty line. Brothers and sisters, this is by design. It's by design. Love thy neighbor as thyself? Hogwash, please. I was in a Zoom meeting last Wednesday with Don Graves, who is a Black man who is also the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Commerce. His message was, how best can I, in the Department of Commerce, use the resources to foster inclusion and equity in underserved communities? Think about that. I was part of the question group. There were 5 white owners of manufacturing companies. The 2 that stood out most to me was the Friedman Seating Company. They manufacture seats for airplanes. Some of you sat on some of their seats. There was a company called Maytock. They make materials for elevators. They were pleading with the Black people who are interested in manufacturing. Contact us, as they will do business with you, even a startup. Those 2, and Billy McFarland, a young Black man who teaches advanced manufacturing at Wright Junior College in Chicago, and Andrew Stetman of the Century Foundation, who is working on a House of Representatives, United States House of Representatives Bill 5124 about manufacturing, where the Biden administration says we're going to allocate $50 billion to see what can be done to communities like Westside Rockford. We are going to use these resources and references for our planned use of church schools to train residents, especially those that Paul James was talking about, the oppressed, of Westside Rockford, for jobs in advanced manufacturing. The starting pay, $70,000 once you get through the training, and they go up to 120 without a college degree.
Excuse me, Reverend Dotson, our 3 minutes is up.
3 minutes is up?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone on the board that's opposed to jumping back on the agenda? I've got a presentation from the Family Court Center, the Public Safety Building Art Project.
Yes.
That I skipped over. Is there any?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the purpose of this agenda item is to have a discussion with the board on a concept that has been presented. Initially, the public safety building project is identified in the ARP budget, which you approved several months ago. But the purpose of today's meeting is not to make any decisions whatsoever that will come down the road. Probably in the next several months. This will come in front of the Operations and Administrative Committee for discussion. It will come in front of the Finance Committee for discussion prior to it coming back to the county board. But we thought it prudent to hear from the courts, from the judges, as to a concept that they have for utilization of the public safety building. For many years, this has been a kind of a question mark for the county board, and this is one idea, one concept that we would like to have the judges lay out and discuss with you, and then we'll have a brief discussion with an architectural and engineering firm that has taken feedback from the courts and tried to develop a vision, a design, potential design on paper. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Judge Doherty and Nicole Tickner, who will kind of lay out their vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Judge Doherty?
Sure, thank you very much. I know you've been hearing about this concept for a few months now, and we think now we can give you a little better idea of what it might involve. But before we get to the what or the where, I'm sorry, to the where of this, where it's going to happen, we wanted you to understand what the functions are of our domestic violence coordinated court. So I'm just going to ask Nicole Tickner to take just a couple of minutes to inform you about what that court does so that you'll understand the services that will be provided in this space.
Thank you, Judge. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nicole Tickner, and I am the Deputy Court Administrator for our Domestic Violence Coordinated Courts. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to come share with you the good and innovative work we're doing over in the Domestic Violence Coordinated Courts. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of history. So 10 years ago, following a grant that we received from the federal government, our domestic violence coordinated courts started in January of 2012. So we're approaching our 10-year anniversary. As I mentioned, funding from the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women made this project possible. And I'm happy to announce, if you've seen recently, maybe in the newspaper or the media, that we just did receive additional funding that's going to take us out to 2024. So we have been grantees of the Department of Justice for over 10 years now, which is quite an accomplishment in itself. In a very brief nutshell, the way that our court works, it's called a coordinated court model, which means both civil and criminal courts talk to one another. We have one criminal court that hears both felony and misdemeanor cases, which is pretty unique to domestic violence court models, all that are related to intimate partner domestic violence. So these are cases that are specific for people that have had some sort of intimate partner relationship. We're not talking about family or household violence. We also have two civil courts that hear what people commonly call restraining orders or divorce cases. And those, through a lengthy screening process, we determine if they belong in that civil court, and then that's where they end up. Something also that makes our court model specialized is that everybody that interacts within our DV court system has specialized training. And we also use grant funds to provide enhanced advocacy. So if you're a survivor coming into the DV courts, you have additional advocacy resources to help you through the process of getting an order of protection or maybe engaging with the criminal court side. And then we have additional administrative support. So people like myself and some of my coworkers that are really problem finders and problem solvers and make sure that all these people can come together, we coordinate things and make sure that we're meeting the objectives of our grant, what we said we would do with the money that we received. And so our key principles are victim safety, offender accountability. But then it's also very important that we feel the judges have the good information to make good decisions about the families they encounter, because decisions you make are only as good as the information that you receive, right? And so we think that's very important. One other thing I wanted to touch on is that we do have a domestic violence assistance center that we commonly call the DVAC. That is located in this courthouse building, but in the annex part of the building, what some people call the old courthouse. That is where you will probably be sent if you show up in this building and you say, I need to get an order of protection or restraining order against someone. That office used to be located in the basement of this courthouse. It dates back to 1998. It was a project of the Junior League. And there are lots of things that happen in that space. So advocates are working with people seeking an order of protection, helping them fill out the paperwork, making sure they understand what their options are. It's a very, very busy office. We file many orders of protection out of that, and I'll give you those numbers in just a second. We're also very proud to have twice been awarded mentor court status, which means that the federal government said, you're doing this work so well that we want you to teach other people how to do it. So both in 2014 and 2017, we received funding to serve as a mentor court. We just ended our reign as a mentor court at the end of September of this year, so just a month ago. And that has allowed us to do so much work nationally. So we have provided training and technical assistance to courts across the country. That picture there may be hard for you to see, but there's maybe some familiar faces in there. We went to visit Scott County, Tennessee, which is just outside of Knoxville, and taught them how to set up a domestic violence court. And we maintain a friendship with them to this day, so that's exciting. Some other things that we've done as a mentor court is we've hosted large site visits here. So some years ago, we had people coming all the way from Idaho, Alaska, Arkansas, all over the place. We're in this building, saw the workings of our court and what we're doing. We hoped to do that again last year, but we had to pivot. So we had a big virtual open house just a few months ago. Again, that was well attended from people all across the country. And we have a very good relationship with the Office of Violence Against Women, so much so that they've said, hey, come do training for us on the trainings that we do. So we've had the ability to serve as faculty through being a mentor court. So we're doing some really exciting things. Today, our DV Criminal Court is one of the busiest courtrooms in Winnebago County. Over 1,000 cases a year go into that courtroom. On average, over 3,000 orders of protection are filed within our county in a year. In FY21, 128 specific divorce cases went to our DV court that were flagged as having a DV subset involvement. And as you've probably heard, the city of Rockford reports domestic violence to be about 40% of their violent crime rate, a little bit higher than that in the last few months. So there's a lot going on within this court and a lot of work that we're doing to try to address the issue of domestic violence in our community. So we hope that we'll continue to grow. I think we know that we'll continue to grow as more resources become available. And we do hope that, enhanced facilities with a focus on litigant safety will really help us continue to be recognized as a leader in this field. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Doherty.
Okay, so all that sounds great, and we thought we were doing great. We couldn't understand why, when domestic violence survivors who are approached and interviewed would tell bad things about their experience in the courthouse. And it was almost always about the process, about navigating the building and the experience before they got into the courtroom. So to help you understand kind of what they see, I want to kind of walk us through the building in terms of the viewpoint of somebody who's coming to file for an order of protection. This is a person who's been either physically abused or intimidated or harassed, and they're worried. They're worried about coming forward to do this. They're worried about the potential for being seen doing what they're doing at the courthouse. The law allows the initial petition to be done confidentially and to be filed without bringing the two parties together. That eventually happens at the next step. But that's an important part of the process, is to make people feel that they're safe in doing this. They are worried about being seen. They're worried about potential threats from the respondent, and they're definitely worried about being caught in kind of closed spaces and losing their security and privacy that way. They may also have a child with them as they try to navigate this. So if you're this person, the first thing you do is you come through, like everybody does, the security entrance, where the sheriff's personnel do a great job of making sure that people coming in the building don't have anything dangerous on them and so forth. That's a part of coming into this secure building. But after that, your next step is, I want to drop my child off at the kid's place. So what you do is, you go past security and you look down that big hall and say, I've got to go down there. You go all the way to the end of that hallway and you make a left. And you exit those doors up on the left, down a half a flight, down another half a flight, until you get down to that little door that's kind of hidden underneath the stairwell. That's the doorway to where you want to go to take your child. Once you go through that door, you go to this hallway, this inviting looking hallway. And you can't really read the sign, but if you walk all the way down there, you'll see the sign for Kids Place. That's where Kids Place is located. Now you can drop off your child. You no longer have to drag the child through the rest of where you're going today. You go back up the stairs. In that hallway that you came down, you're going to go down again. But before you get to the end, you're going to turn left at another hallway, which isn't labeled for where you're going, by the way. You're going to go down through a pair of double doors and you're going to find these elevators. You're going to figure out that the elevator on the left is one you can't use. That's only for court personnel. You hopefully figure out it's the one on the right. You go up that elevator 3 floors. Now you're at the DVAC, the Domestic Violence Assistance Center. Those are the people who can help you prepare that order of protection, tell you what you need to do, the petition for the order of protection. So now you're making progress, but you can't just file it there. You got to file it with the clerk. So we're going to go back to that elevator. We're going to go down to the first floor to this clerk's office. And while you're hoping no one really sees what you're doing there, we've had situations where a family member saw what someone was doing. You really kind of hope it's on the down low, that no one really sees what you're doing. So what you do is you go up and you stand under this big sign that says order of protection, so that anybody walking by that glass-walled room knows exactly why you're there. From that point, you're going to walk back down the hallway, because now you're headed to court. You're almost there, right? You go back down that hallway, you go to these elevators, there's 3 of them, and they're crowded. And you get in that elevator. I hope you don't run into somebody that you don't want to run into in that elevator. You get back up to the courtroom and you wait. And where you wait is this glass-walled enclosure area outside of our 3 family law courtrooms on the 4th floor. I don't know why we designed them like that, or that's before any of our time. It's a bad design. And some time ago, the National Center for State Courts did a study of our courthouse. And of this area in particular, what they said was that this area is a volatile one with an ever-present risk of intimidating and threatening behavior towards parties and witnesses, as well as violent confrontations erupting. It's a hot spot. And I think court security would tell you that they agree with that too. And when you finally do get to the courtroom, the National Center for State Courts also recommended that safe and secure waiting areas need to be identified and provided for the people who are waiting for their case to be heard. Because a lot of times these are not scheduled, right? They're an emergency order, and so there are sometimes delays. When you finally arrive at the courtroom, this is as big as it can look. This is a photo taken from the very back corner. It's the smallest courtroom in the courthouse. And the National Center for State Courts has also stated the opinion that there's a higher potential for violent confrontation in cramped courtrooms. People seem to be more on edge when the opposite party is in close proximity, and people act out in those close quarters. So our problem is we want to make sure that DV petitioners are safe and that they feel safe. We want to make sure that our court facilities aren't spread out all over the place. We want to make sure that they're not too small. We want to make sure that people don't feel trapped when they're in this stressful period. That's our problem. One of your problems is that building. What are you going to do with it? And I know you've been talking about it for a long time. And what we're here to suggest is that maybe those 2 problems have one solution. And so I'm going to turn it over to the guys from Larson and Darby to talk about that design.
Good evening. My name is Jed Trias. I'm the Director of Design at the Larson & Darby Group. With me here today is Steve Nelson and Adalberto De Jesus from our office. We've been working over the past several months with Judge Doherty's office to articulate this vision of a new family court center in the Winnebago County Public Safety Building. So as Judge Doherty had mentioned in his presentation there, that there are a number of issues with the courthouse that do not currently meet the state of Illinois minimum courtroom standards. The security entrance, as we all know, when we came into this building, was undersized and can be congested at times. And the court system was shut down and is not able to meet social distancing requirements in pandemic situations that we just most recently experienced. And then basically the circulation issues that are associated with going through that process are hampered by the current configuration of the courthouse. And that leads to situations where the family law environment might be unsafe, and as well as insufficient number of courtrooms and space or appropriately sized waiting areas for participants in these trials. So here's that security entrance as we all entered in the building this morning or this evening. And this is one of those courtrooms, an existing jury courtroom. And an existing non-jury courtroom, that smaller courtroom that you'd see. So in your packets that we have in front of you are some 11 by 17 basically floor plans that kind of describe some of the approaches that we've taken. And basically at the crux of these is the meeting the Illinois minimum courtroom standards, enlarging and reconfiguring the security entrances, allowing for social distancing and making the courthouse pandemic proof, and then allowing for a more efficient circulation for the different family courts processes that are undertaken in their building. And then also providing a safe family law environment. And what that amounts to is creating 5 new courtrooms with sufficient waiting areas in front of them. So, and what that courtroom layout basically is accomplished through adding 2 additional jury courtrooms and 3 non-jury courtrooms. So the thing you see on the screen right now is basically a reconfiguration of the existing building security entrance. What we're doing is popping out the entrance to provide secure vestibules there and providing basically more ability to spread out in the courtroom entry area. And then what that also does is kind of provide a prelude to an entry area in the rest of the building. So as you can see on the right-hand side of there is an open staircase that will allow circulation not only via the elevator, but also up the stair onto the second level, which is where the new courtroom spaces would be. This is also showing a relocation of the jury assembly area, and also on this floor, we also relocate the kids' place from its current location to an area on the first floor. So you can start to see how well, or the improvement in circulation that we get when, or not only kids' places, but also for things like jury assembly. And some of the other innovation or changes that we're proposing here are things like the new courtroom. So this is showing a new jury courtroom, which is an enlarged courtroom, and also a larger sized deliberation room that will allow for COVID spacing. And I guess I should also point out in those floor plans that they're also showing relocations on the second floor for the DVAC offices. And some of the components of those offices include places like secure waiting areas for people who are utilizing those services, and enlarged waiting areas in front of the new courtroom areas. So this is that new entrance that we're proposing, that enlarged entrance. We're providing a much more inviting entry into the new courthouse facility, or this new courthouse facility. And then this is the reconfigured entry space. So from that vestibule area, you go into this area where you enter through the magnetometers. And then this takes you into a lobby area on that first floor. From this view, immediately to the left would be the entrance into kids' place. And then you can see jury assembly right there, and then the open stair that takes you up to the second level. The existing elevators would still be there, but so it gives visitors there an array of options to get under the second floor area and to access those courts and those facilities on the second floor without being confined into an elevator space, confined elevator. So this is that enlarged, expanded waiting area that's immediately accessible to the courtrooms. The courtrooms are clearly labeled on the back wall there, and then we've got the open stair, and then a security desk that allows for better control of the entirety of that waiting area. And immediately off to the right there would be a private entrance. So as you come up that stair, you could immediately enter into the DVAC offices, and you don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time in that public waiting area if you wish to. So this is an enlarged jury courtroom. One of the things that we're talking about doing to meet some of those standards is to raise the ceiling height in the main courtroom area there, so that would entail some modifications of the existing slab inside the inside the building in the area of the courtroom spaces. And now I'll turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about some of the cost information that we generate for this project.
Thanks, Jed. Jed gets to show you all the pretty pictures, and I get to show you the numbers, the reality of everything. Just in quick summary, what we went through over that many months of process with the judge and all of the staff was really a very well-encompassing process from an overview standpoint. There are still many decisions that would need to be made if the project moves forward, but you can see in the images that were provided that a focus on safety, security, adjacencies, efficiency in moving from spaces, and making people feel secure and knowledgeable as to where they are. Hence that open stair, so they can not feel trapped in a staircase with someone they don't want to be with. So there was a big focus from everybody on that group that we met with to really prioritize those into a very functional space. And it takes over the second floor and portion of the first floor of the PSP building. So you'll see here, this is again a high-level summary of dollars. The renovation cost, or the base cost, is $18.5 million. That includes in it everything that we wanted to have in that base cost, including a hard construction contingency, because we're very early. There are a lot of things that still need to be worked out. So we're carrying a contingency in that, a soft construction contingency. That also includes furniture, fixtures, and equipment, otherwise known as FF&E. It includes our fees. It includes all of the hard construction costs associated with what we're estimating this project would cost at this time. Then you'll see below that a list of 4 other things that are typically, 3 of the 4 of those are owner-provided items. That's your IT infrastructure, your communications infrastructure, and abatement of any hazardous materials that might be in the old PSP building. Those would be handled individually, and the dollars are accounted for there for an additional $1.9 million. There's one item there you see listed that is upsizing the size of an elevator. I would just say that, again, we're looking at the 30,000-foot overview. We are proposing to renovate less than 50% of the square footage of this building. So because of that, that should not trigger any other upgrades that once you go over that threshold, then you have to bring everything in the building up to code. We haven't had those conversations with the city yet, because it's too early in the process, not having presented to you yet. But there's the potential for those things, but because we're under 50%, those should not trigger. The exception is that elevator that you see listed there. That would be for public use, because there is already an elevator that would be court use that is stretcher size. But for the safety of anybody that might have a problem during a court proceeding on the second floor, one of the public elevators probably should be upsized. It would just be best practices, so we listed that as an additional item on there. I can answer any questions that you have on design and or budget, as can Jed.
Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. You spoke to if you don't exceed, I assume the number is 50%. If you don't exceed that on renovations, you're not held to the same standards as a complete renovation as far as utilities and upgrade. So what happens if and when we decide to do the other 50%? Is it still separate items, or is it then that we'd have to conform to rules and regs?
That would require the conversation with the city on how they'd like to do that. But my understanding would be once you go over that 50% threshold sometime down the road, then you would want to bring that up to building up to go.
Yeah, just like it's, okay, thank you.
Mr. Billage?
I mean, I have a couple other questions that I didn't know about, but I was actually kind of confused. You mentioned in one of the courtrooms you would have to actually assess the slab and raise the ceiling on that. Is there a necessity for that, and what would be the necessity for that?
Yeah, to meet the minimum court standards that we were talking about, none of your courtrooms have the right ceiling height. There is a required ceiling height for courtrooms, following those guidelines. So that would require lifting that ceiling up. So it's cutting the slab and raising that portion into that third floor area. That's why that would happen.
That raising of the ceiling is confined only to the so that area of the ceiling is confined only to those areas of the courtroom itself. That'd be the only courtroom.
And with the follow-up, that I mean, it kind of goes into the existing courtrooms that we already have with in the obviously in the pictures that you had, as far as the existing courtrooms, the small courtrooms that don't meet the standards, what would be done as far as those go? Is that included in this at all whatsoever, or is there any kind of renovations that was planned with that?
No, our charge was specifically to deal with the utilization of the public. But that area would be free to be utilized as
Thank you. Mr. Webster?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your presentation and that, but when I see on the last page there, you got an approval calendar and expect to get this approved by December 21st. I think this whole thing, even your presentation, is premature because none of the board members that I know of have been involved with anything here at any committee levels at all. And something like this, especially when we're talking 20 million bucks here, yeah, I just don't see any way in the world that you're going to get any kind of approval on this timeline. I think it needs to be stretched out quite a bit longer than that to give all the board members a chance to maybe weigh in some of they may have some input on it.
Yes,
And so,
Mr. Chair. Yeah,
Mr. Thompson?
yeah, good point, Mr. Webster. This is very preliminary. This is just to brief the board on the concept. It'll be thoroughly vetted within the Operations and Administrative Committee and the Finance Committee before it comes back in front of the county board. That timeline that's on that last page is very tentative, very fluid, and we realize that this is going to take a lot of discussion. Tonight was just to bring the board up to date on what the court's vision is for the public safety building and what one potential option is for the board's consideration. As I mentioned earlier, this was identified early on in our phase 2 that these discussions were starting. Now it's to the point where we need to, bring the board in, inform you as to where things are at right now in terms of a concept, a vision, potential design, and now it'll go through that rigorous committee review process before it comes back in front of the board.
Mr. Webster, follow-up?
yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Seeing all this, the first thing that's going through my head was I hope that we're not misleading the architects, the chief judge, and anyone else involved, thinking that this is something that, hoorah, we're ready to roll with this, because we're not. Thank you.
Mr. Tassoni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like I said, my comments are not directed toward the architectural firm, but I'd just like to say that I was part of a subcommittee that was started up maybe 3 years ago. And it was a pretty lengthy process over a year and a half that I was very much a part of in vetting and choosing an architectural group to lay out what the future of the PSB might look like. We spent a few $100,000 with that architectural group, and into the end, they brought forth 3 proposals for this board to make a decision on what they'd like that end result to look like, whether it be demolition, a partial build, or a complete renovation. And I spent a lot of time on that committee, and a lot of long nights, a lot of presentations, and we got it. And basically since COVID and pandemic, it did get put on the back burner. I've asked where do we stand with it a few times, but I know we spent a few $100,000 on that. And just at this time, seeing this in front of me, I asked myself, why was I there if this is what we're looking at now? Because this board hasn't even had opportunity to decide what they want the future of that building to look like. Thank you.
Ms. Gorel?
Thank you. Does this also include renovation of the existing old jail that's there? Or is that still going to be another problem, having that jail?
We would be mothballing the remainder of the building.
So that means we still have the problem of the old jail that's not going away. And we're not going to be utilizing it at all.
Well, part of what we were talking about doing in this project would be mothballing. We would still need to decide what those areas could be utilized in the future, but we would be doing things like renovating the HVAC systems there to bring them up to a current standard and allow them to put their status while we decide what we want to do with those things. And then there would be new HVAC systems installed with
But if we end up tearing down that building, do we still need a new system there? Because we've been talking about tearing down the old jail. Does that mean that we're going to be putting in, what do you call it, an HUV system, and then tear down the jail? And where's that system going to service if we aren't utilizing the old jail?
So the concept for this would be the reuse of the PSP. We would be mothballing the third and fourth floors of the building and the portion of the first floor of the building. And we would be reusing the entrance area and the second floor of that building to accommodate the new family employment center. We would not be tearing, the only thing we would be doing would be interior demolition to allow that. The shell of the building would remain basically the same.
Excuse me, but have you thought of any use for that remaining mothballed building?
Our charge is truly just the family court we're looking at.
So we still have another problem. Yeah, I see that.
So that area could be redeveloped for whatever purpose we'd like to utilize that for, but the issue with the exorbitant cost of operation for the current HPD system would be addressed by replacing those systems with these systems, what we call mothball systems, to allow those areas to be temporary. But they wouldn't be configured for new offices or anything like that.
So will the new system also have filters in it that go, because right now with COVID, this is something that travels through our systems, and just like the Legionnaire disease. It's that type of thing. Will we have filters to stop that?
We haven't designed any of the systems yet, but yes, we would account for all that. We're doing that on the project going forward.
Do you? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What damage is caused to the structure by not tempering the space?
Well, not tempering a space.
It'll cause deterioration to the structure over time.
How? Explain how.
So if you're not heating or cooling it to a minimum standard, really cooling is less of an issue. If you're not heating it to a standard, it's going to freeze and thaw just like the concrete on the outside of the building. It'll create condensation, it'll create water issues. Even if you drain systems down, you'll have a number of system issues that will not be reusable or restartable. So it's a minimum standard to create those spaces so that they're tempered. You could use them for storage, or you can just leave them alone and set them at the minimum threshold temperature. But if you don't do that, eventually that will creep in and then it'll eventually reach to the courtyard, to the courtroom floor building, and it'll cause, there's no insulation between the floor and the second floor and the third floor. You're going to have cold temperatures up here and heated temperatures at the high ceiling of the courtroom. It's going to create moisture and structural cracking issues.
But until we move forward with whatever we decide to do with the building, if we were to stop heating the entire building now, what damage would it cause to the structure of the building?
I think you'd see concrete cracking, you'd see condensation on the inside of the building, you'd lose condensation in the windows and the caulking. You could have other animals, rodents taking over residency in there, a number of things.
So I'm curious about it because they just renovated the Embassy Suites building, which sat vacant for years, unheated, and it seems like it did not damage that structure. But is this structure different, and would this react differently if we were to next week stop heating the space that's being unused right now?
Well, I mean, there's a situation there where you're utilizing, that building is the entrance to this building. So I don't know that you can ignore the remainder of the building and still kind of put a Band-Aid on just the portion of the building.
But until we act on this, if we were heating the entrance and not heating the entire rest of the building, would the building be irreparably harmed by that?
For a short period of time, no, but if it's an ongoing thing, you'd run into it.
Okay, even though, like I said, the Embassy Suites property
Yeah, we
survived.
did that project, but I know there were issues in it.
So when you say a short period of time, a matter of months or years?
Months.
So within months, the building would be damaged by,
Start to see things. But I should point out that Embassy Suites, no one else was utilizing that Embassy Suites building for anything. It was just an empty shell
right,
for as long as we were seeing.
right.
But that's certainly not the case with this building. We're utilizing a portion of it as the entrance to this building.
Right, but that's a small portion that could be heated separately from the rest of the property.
And it also serves as circulation to the lower levels of the building. So I think there's a utilization of that for the coroner's office.
Right, but that has a separate heating system. So what I'm wondering is, while we deliberate over this, can we save some money by shutting off the heating system in the rest of the building? Okay.
Short period of time.
Yeah. Just a matter of months, though?
Yeah, a short period of time, yeah. I wouldn't go through the whole cycle because they're going to start to see noticeable damage.
Really? Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Billage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to actually say, I mean, it is good to see that we're figuring out what we're going to do with it, and I'm glad that the courthouse has come up with some kind of solution that they suggest. Obviously, I know that we're waiting for committee. This is just a presentation, so, but I will make a comment in regards to shutting off the heating. It's not something that you're going to be visibly seeing a lot of, but actually, I did a walkthrough on that project for the hotel. I actually turned down that bid. There was a lot more damage than you can imagine. There was a lot of floors that had giant gaping holes. But that happened over years. So for the initial portion where they're talking about where it's going to happen over a few months, is you're not going to see a giant deterioration, but there's going to be cracks forming, and there's going to be certain structural damage that will start to happen that eventually over time will start to decay as far as chipping and breaking through, as far as floors cracking, that you're going to have to completely redo, which you're going to be cutting out certain sections of the slab and having to pour a new slab and somehow tying it in together. So that part I will comment on that to say that that's my experience. I've had to do that on a building before myself, and that does come from not properly ventilating and heating to a certain minimum standard for concrete to stay at the point that it needs to be. Outside portions of buildings, I know that a lot of people comment on masonry cement. It's a little bit different than concrete. It's a little bit more fluid, and that's why I make a comment on that portion of it, because it does get moisture from the exterior. It also, there is that heat that comes from the inside of the building as well. That's what keeps it to going a little bit further. Concrete kind of works a little bit differently. It's a little bit more stern. So once a portion of it starts to break, it starts to break. But I think that I'm just excited to see that we can go to the next meeting. Like I do share the one hesitation, such as Mr. Tassoni, because he has been in charge of that group, that they had multiple other ways that they were thinking about going about this building. But if we can reutilize, if it's something, I think that's definitely, we should form another committee on top of having it at finance. I think there should be at least a lead from the operations to help them out with the discussion on that portion of it. Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we were to shut down the heat in that one part of the building for, let's say, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, 5 months, what kind of savings would the county, what would we would be saving? Do we have any idea?
Mr. Rickert? do you have a,
Yes, I can indirectly answer that. It appears for 2021, we spent $90,153 on heating and gas, and on electricity, $223,000. So those were our utility costs for 2021. And I assume you could prorate that, you know, if you're going to do it for 4 months, multiply it by that and divide by 12, that'll give you probably a rough estimate of what you would save in utility costs. I'm much more concerned about the damage cost to the building and freezing the boilers and the pipes, what that would do to the building. And I think our maintenance director could probably give you some insight of what potential building damage would be caused by doing that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ricker, because I'm concerned too. It was like, you know, is it really worth turning it off or causing damage? So, but thank you.
Mr. Tassoni?
Thank you once again. And I'd just like to ask the architectural firm, have you assessed the heating system in that building? And do you know that it is isolatable without extensive renovation? Are you aware of that?
So we relied on some of the Prairie Board reports that were supplied to us. We had conducted a pretty detailed study. Steve mentioned that we had not gotten into greater detail in terms of how we might accomplish some of these things.
Have you spoken to Mr. Franks, our engineer, that knows that system?
Yeah, we've been working with Sean.
I just, over the last few years, I've heard it's not isolatable unless you kill the whole building, so to speak.
Ms. Scorrell?
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, is there any time limit on that art money that we have to use it in such a time limit?
It's a 2-year funding, and so we would have through the end of 2024. So there's, you know, like I said early on, this is going to be brought in front of various committees of the board for more vetting, more discussions with the courts, Larson and Darby. So, but yeah, it's a 2-year funding.
May I add to that? Yes. And we truly need to update our our courtrooms and the way we do business. Because of the fact when this courthouse was built and the old one was torn down, there's a lot of years you can't even remember, can you? But
well, I know the old one is still standing. Think about how old
this building is to begin with, and when those rooms were done, first of all, our population was about half of what it is right now in Winnebago County. Second of all, just like anything else, if we don't update it, we lose it, and this is what's happening. Plus, we have another problem that domestic violence has shot straight up in the air. And we do have to have that protection for each person that walks into that courtroom, that their mate is not, or their boyfriend, whatever it is, girlfriend, boyfriend, anything, does not harm the children, number one, because where our kids' place is right now isn't really convenient. Second of all, we don't want to have violence within our courtrooms because of the amount of cases that are going through. I can't believe when I read the paper right now how many order of protections we have in the paper every single day. It's unbelievable. So we're using our courtrooms to the maximum. And if we have to do something to update this courthouse and get that started. And if that's where we begin, then that's where we begin. And it's actually very beneficial to our public and keeping them safe. Thank you.
Mr. Butita?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm curious, does the administration believe that the renovation cost is going to be covered solely by ARP funds? Is that the intent?
Yes, that's the intent. Yep.
Mr. Webster?
Yes, thank you one last time. I think that what we've heard here just now, it's a little sampling, a snippet, if you will, of the questions that are going to pop up on this, and we're not going to get them solved here tonight, and that's why I think it's very important for us to move this discussion to committee levels and get our questions answered there, because going as we are now, we're not going to get all of our answers here tonight. It's obvious. So I suggest we would move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Judge Doherty, Ms. Tickner, Tom, thanks for coming, and it was very informative and clarifying what we're faced with here. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we'll move on with the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes for October 14th, 2021? Motion by Ms. Crosby, second by Mr. Lindmark. Do we have any board members opposed to the approval of those minutes? Seeing none, Clerk Gummow, can you show that every board member present has approved? And then we have a layover of the minutes for October 28th, 2021. Can I get a motion for the layover? Ms. Crosby, and a second by Mr. Webster. Do we have any board members opposed to the layover of October 28th minutes? Seeing none, Clerk Gummow, can you show all members present that they approved? Consent agenda. Ms. Gummow? I'm sorry? A motion for the consent agenda. Thank you for your assist. Do we have any board members opposed? I'm sorry? A first and a second. Thank you. A first motion by Mr. Arena, second by Mr. Lindmark. Any board members opposed? I'm here. Yeah. Do we have any board members opposed? No, we got to do a roll call. Come on. Man, everything was running smooth up to this raffle report and consent agenda. Call the roll, please.
Thank you.
Ms. Gummow. Clerk Gummow. This is for the auditor's report. There is no auditor's report.
For the raffle report?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Clerk Gummow.
Mr. Salgado, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald, still absent. Mr. Chairman, that is 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
The consent agenda is approved. Appointments. Per the county board rules, the board chairman appointments require a 30-day layover unless there is a suspension of the rule. The zoning board of appeals compensation, $100 per member in attendance at convened meetings. We're looking at a reappointment for Greg Tilley. Greg Tilley of Cherry Valley for his appointment November of 2021 to November 2026. North Park Fire Protection Board, compensation not to exceed $1,000 per year. Ron Lundstrom, a reappointment, Rockford, Illinois, November 2021 through November 2024. And the Winburn Sioux Fire Protection District, compensation not to exceed $1,500 per year. Guy Cunningham, reappointment from Winnebago, Illinois. And his term is May of 2021 through May of 2024. Reports on standing committees. First up is Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finance Committee has 7 items tonight. The first one is ordinance imposing a tax on the operations of hotels in Winnebago County, Illinois. This is to be laid over. I'd like to suspend the rules and vote on this today, since it's pretty straightforward.
We have a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules, second by Mr. Hoffman. We'll call the roll. Clerk Gummo, please call the roll. Any objections?
Chairman.
Ms. Vaughn, can you please clarify?
Thank you, Chairman. So after our last county board meeting, I checked the Roberts rules again. You're not allowed to have debate or discussion on suspension of the rules, so you just vote yes or no, and it has to be a 3/5 vote based on our ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Clerk Gummo will continue with a roll call for suspension of the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Chairman, that is 16 yes, 1 no, and 3 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. The motion carries to suspend the rules. Mr. Salgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve ordinance imposing tax of operation hotels in Winnebago County, Illinois. And I so move.
Mr. Salgado has made a motion to imposing a tax on the Winnebago County, the operational hotels in Winnebago County. Is there a second? Ms. Gorel. Is there any discussion?
Just real quick, this is a 5-year sunset clause that it's been revisited. Essentially, this is, if you all recall, this is in regards to the Reclaiming First Sports Court 2, that where we imposed this tax on the hotels. Primarily, it's to cover to come from tourism that's going to generate from the expansion of that indoor facility out there at Sports Court 2.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Clerk Gummo.
I have a question.
We have a question. Ms. Fellers, go ahead, please.
Hey, does this tax apply also to Airbnbs and non-traditional hotel rooms?
My understanding, it's no. It's only on existing hotels.
Ms. Fellers, did you hear that? Were you able to count? Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I have no follow-up.
Follow-up? Go ahead, Ms. Fellers. No follow-up.
Breaking up a little bit.
Okay, Clerk Gummo, we will continue with the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Girl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald is still absent. How about Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that would be 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamma. Motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next resolution is awarding bid of the roof restoration of the county courthouse, and I so move.
We have a motion awarding the bid for roof restoration of the county courthouse. Second by Mr. Butita. Is there any discussion? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was looking at the bids, and I'm just curious, these unit prices, wet insulation, blocking, is this stuff that may be needed or will be needed? And then the reason I'm asking is it seems like other bidders were maybe a little bit higher in the base bid, but much lower in those. So what's the anticipated additional cost for those items?
Sean?
We're looking around. All right.
That's if they find anything else other than the wet areas that were discovered with the x-ray.
So you're not anticipating it's being significant, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, so we've got a motion and a second for awarding the bid for roof restoration of the county courthouse. Clerk Gumma, call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz. Mr. Chairman, 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
Motion carries. Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Our next items, I'd like to take 2 of them together, item 4 and item 8. Resolution awarding the Hyper-V to VMware, and then the resolution awarding to purchase for the fire maintenance, and I so move to combine those 2.
We have a motion to combine item number 4, the awarding Hyper-V and to VMware, and item number 8, awarding purchase for the fire eye maintenance. I got a motion by Mr. McCarthy, a second by Mr. Lindmark. Is there any discussion on combining these 2 items? Seeing none, we can call the roll. Clerk Gummo, to combine these 2 items.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Girl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Chairman, 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. We're combining these 2 items. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take the next 3, 5, 6, and 7. Resolution awarding juvenile detention center scanner. Resolution awarding out for warranty PCs. Resolution awarding the website refresh redesign. And these are ARP related, so I'd like to take those together and vote on them together. And I so move.
We have a motion to combine
Mr.
3 items, but right, I'm already seeing Ms. Vaughn, if you could please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the previous motion, which wasn't necessary, was just to combine the two items. So now we actually have to have a motion to approve items 4 and 8 before we move on to the next set. So we're bearing with Mr. Booker, but yeah. So can we have a motion to approve items 4 and 8?
Mr. Lindmark, we've got a motion to approve items 4 and 8. A second by Mr. Bilich. Any other discussion? So now we'll call a roll on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The vote to approve, we will start with Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena? Mr. Bilich? Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Butita? Mrs. Crosby? Ms. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Gurl? Mrs. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman? Mr. Kelly? Mr. Lindmark? Mr. McCarthy? Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz? Mr. Tassoni? Mr. Webster? Mr. Chairman, 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
So we have approved those 2 items. Now, my apologies, Mr. Salgado. We'll continue with
So as I earlier stated, I'd like to combine 5, 6, and 7. Resolution awarding juvenile detention center scanner. Resolution awarding out warranty PCs. Resolution awarding website refresh redesign. Those are all ARP monies. And I so move.
got a motion by Mr. Salgado to combine 5, 6, and 7. A second by Mr. McCarthy? No? Motion to approve 5, 6, and 7. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And we've got a motion by Mr. Who'd I have it first? Mr. Salgado, and I had a second by Mr. Village. Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there might be some conversation about the website refresh. Perhaps we should take that one separate from the other 2. There may be members who want to, or what would be the procedure then if you want to vote against one of these 3 and not all of the others?
I'll take back and decline my motion and then just motion for 5 and 6 approval.
Thank you.
And I so move.
So we have a motion by Mr. Salgado to remove his motion, his original motion, to combine 5, 6, and 7.
5, 6 only.
5 and 6 only?
Yep.
And a second by Mr. Bilich. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing no one opposed, we can mark all members. No.
I'll have to take
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're combining 5 and 6, so now we need a motion to approve 5 and 6, and then the second.
So I motion to approve 5 and 6.
There we go. Motion to approve 5 and 6. The juvenile detention center scanner and the awarding out of warranty TCs by Mr. Salgado's motion, and a second by Mr. Hoffman. Do we have any board members opposed to that motion? Is there any discussion? All right, roll call vote. Ms. Gummo, Clerk Gummo, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Arena. Yes. Mr. Bilich. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita. Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz. Yes. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Chairman, 17 board members yes, 3 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Salgado.
And finally, motioning to approve resolution awarding website refresh redesign, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Salgado awarding the website refresh design. Is there a second? Mr. Butita, is there any discussion on this item? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear for the record, we're spending $47,000, and for that price, the vendor is going to work with us for as long as it takes for us to get a satisfactory website. It's all inclusive for as long as it takes.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mr. Tassoni.
The item 7 was on the floor for discussion. Wasn't it just 5 and 6 currently?
Ms. Vaughn?
Yes, 7 is on the floor. There was a motion in a second. Thank you.
Probably because it's tough to follow me. All right. Ms. Fellers has a question. Ms. Fellers.
So it's not necessarily a question, it's more some comments that I have about the agreement that has been put forth for the website refresh, although I do would like some clarifications. In reading the contract that's been put forward, I see nowhere where there's anything that is specific or measurable as to what we're actually going to be getting for our money. It gives some broad examples, like, for example, make something more mobile accessible. Is it more mobile accessible, or are we going to make the actual website mobile accessible? Will people be able to use it on their cell phones? I also believe that when we're looking at a refresh on a website, what most people think of with that is that it will look different and that it will feel more modern when the end user is using the actual product. And in reading the description of the services that are going to be provided by KMK, I don't see any kind of branding refresh or any kind of design capabilities. Can someone speak to that, please?
Ms.
Hi,
Grindle.
Angela. This is Danielle Grindle speaking. Can you hear me?
I can.
So as it comes to your question about mobile compatibility, our new website proposal will be mobile compatible. So that means it will look different if you're looking at it on a computer versus on your phone. Currently, our website is not mobile compatible. The proposal will also include improvements like becoming ADA compliant. And remind me again of your third question.
My third question is about branding, but before that, you said that it will be mobile accessible. I mean, it will be, but in the contract, in the resolution, it actually just says more mobile accessible. Will it be up to modern standards? We've got that in the contract?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. And then my third question was about branding, for like a logo redesign and for a different feel or a different end user experience for marketing purposes. I just want to make sure that we're getting our money's worth here. When this was put forth, you were not yet in your current position, so I understand that you'll be managing this and that you will be doing a lot of the work. I just want to make sure that KMK will be doing their work too.
Yes, thank you. So as far as the brand redesign, we will have a completely different look to our website. It'll be in an updated platform that is yet to be determined in the design phase. So that's something that I'll be meeting with KMK. I'll also gladly be meeting with any board members that want to have input on the design and look of the website. As far as the logo, that was something that was actually offered to be addressed by KMK, but at this time, our staff has decided to table that as a separate project, but that's something we could certainly visit if we're interested in having our logo redone as well.
Okay, my other question is that in the ownership of the work that is being produced, In the resolution, it says that KMK has to give express written consent for the content that they are creating for the county to be used by another entity. Does that include other county entities? So can we still use this work product for other departments? For example, if the clerk wanted to use some of these redesign or refresh, can the clerk use that without us having to pay additional fees to KMK?
Yeah, so as far as, I believe you're asking about any imaging or refreshing, that's something that, anything that's in our department. Currently, there are some other departments that have their own projects with KMK. That's something that just coincidentally is still managed by KMK. So because of that, we have the luxury of kind of having that cross collaboration. That was something that I asked KMK of myself. So it's my understanding that, yes, different departments would be able to utilize those at no additional cost.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you for allowing me a follow-up. Just to be clear, Ms. Feller's raised some, questions about it. So, we established that for $47,000, they're going to work with us until we sign off on it. Mr. Thompson, what will be that sign-off procedure for us saying that we're approving the work?
Well, I'll certainly consult with staff and leadership on the board to make sure that the board is completely satisfied with the end product.
Okay, and KMK is fine with that, right? See, my concern is it seems like it's such an open-ended contract that KMK is like putting themselves out there to just keep working until, to some undefined point. But if they're agreeing to that, that's great. But I just want to make sure that that is what we're getting.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Go ahead, Danielle.
And if I may add to that as well, this is something that in the proposal that we received, there's different phases. So one being discovery phase, one being design phase. At the end of each of these phases, it says it's defined and reviewed by all stakeholders for approval before moving forward. So that's something that, since this is being led by me, I suppose I would have the final say before approving any phases and going on to the next one. But like we mentioned, that's up for discussion with whoever wants to be involved in those discussions.
I trust your judgment on it. I just want to make sure that we get something we're satisfied with. Thank you.
Good. That ends discussion. We've got a motion and a second. Awarding a website refresh redesign. Clerk Gumma, can you please call roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Girl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz has left the building. Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Wescott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Chairman, 16 yes, 1 no, and 4 absent.
Ms.
I'm
Vaughn?
sorry.
The count.
15.
Yeah,
15 yes, I'm sorry, 15 yes, 1 no, 4 are absent.
Correct.
Thank you for the clarification. Motion carries. Mr. Salgado?
That concludes our report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Moving on to zoning committee, Mr. Webster.
Sorry to say, we have no report.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Economic Development Committee, Mr. Billich.
We also have no report. We will be actually having a meeting next Monday.
Next Monday.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Billich. Operations and Administrative Committee, in Mr. McDonald's absence, we'll have Mr. Butita.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have 3 items tonight to bring before the board. The first one is a resolution authorizing the execution of a renewal agreement with Blue Cross Blue Shield for the administration of self-insured PPO and POS insurance plan. I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Butita for the authorization of the execution of renewal agreement with Blue Cross Blue Shield and for the administration of self-insured PPO and POS insurance plan. A second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Wescott. Any opposed? Discussion. Is there discussion on this resolution? Seeing none. Gama, can you call the roll?
Certainly, we'll start with Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Salgado. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Chairman, 16 board members yes, 4 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gama. Resolution passes. Mr. Butita.
Okay, our next item is a resolution authorizing replacement pharmaceutical services at River Bluff Nursing Home. I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Butita, replacement pharmaceutical services at River Bluff Nursing Home. Do I have a second? Ms. Crosby, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Lindmark. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Clerk Gama, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Salgado. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is 16 board members yes, 4 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gama. The resolution passes. Mr. Butita.
Okay, and the last item is a resolution authorizing the execution of a renewal agreement with Voya Financial for stop-loss specific coverage on the self-insured copay, POS, and high-deductible medical plans. And I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Butita authorizing the execution renewal agreement with Voya Financial for stop-loss specific coverage on the self-insured copay, POS, and high-deductible medical plans. Is there a second? Mr. Wescott, Ms. Crosby, and Mr. Webster. Is there any discussion on this? Seeing none, no discussion. Clerk Gama, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Salgado. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 16 board members yes, 4 board members absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo, and the resolution passes. Mr. Butita.
That concludes the report.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. Public Works Committee. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report at this time. Our next scheduled Public Works Committee meeting will be Tuesday, November 16th, 5 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Public Safety and Judiciary Committee, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No report, but I just want to mention that in the month of October, our federal prisoner inmate program brought in $480,000. And so that is great news. Our next meeting will be November 17th at 5:30, Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Unfinished business. Mr. Lindmark. $480,000 for the month of October from the federal government for our federal inmates. Unfinished business. We don't have any unfinished. We do. Ah, yes. I was about ready to turn the page. Thank you. Unfinished business, we have appointments of the Pecatonica Cemetery Association that were read in on September 30th, 2021. Elizabeth or Betsy Doty, reappointment, Pecatonica, Illinois, November 2020 through November 2026. The Rockford Hebrew Cemetery Association that was read in on September 30th, 2021. David Sklar, reappointment, term of October 2020 through October 2026. Dr. Stephen Geller, reappointment, 2021, October of 2021 through October 2027. Stephen Lertzman is a new appointment, December of 2020 through December of 2026. Goldie Pekarsky is a new appointment, December 2020 through December 2026, and Terry Gordon is a new appointment, also December 2020 to December 2026. Is there any discussion? Mr. Gurl? Is there a motion
Yes, I would like to make a motion to vote on all these.
We have a motion by Mr. Gurl.
To approve, sorry.
To approve all of these appointments. Do we have a second, Mr. Lindmark and Mr. Tassoni? Is there any discussion now? Seeing none. Clerk Gummo, please call the roll.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Salgado. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Wescott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita. Mrs. Crosby. Thank you, Chairman. That is 16 yes, 4 board members are absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Those appointments have passed. Moving on to new business. Any board members with any new business? Seeing none. Clerk Gummo, are there any announcements on the communications?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Mr. Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A reminder that we will be having a special county board meeting on November 17th at 6 p.m. One agenda item is to take up the, or to be presented the redistricting, reapportionment plan and map. one agenda item, no action taken, right? It's just a introduction. That's November 17th
at 6 p.m. here in the county board chambers?
Correct.
All right, so we'll have our public safety meeting before that. All right. Thank you again, Mr. Thompson. Well, again, it was an honor to be asked to preside over the meeting, but there is a flow and a rhythm to this job up here. It's not as easy as you might think. It's very easy to sit out there, that's for sure. I appreciate your patience. Sorry if I've extended the meeting. So I've said my piece. I see a couple of hands pop up. Mr. Webster, please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Aaron. You did a good job. Under the circumstances, this was, when you looked at the agenda when we walked in, you could see it's going to be a long night. And so you did a good job. And the good thing is, to your right and to your left, you always had somebody to catch you when you fall, you know. And so that was great. And to Fred, thank you, Fred, for what you've done. You deserved every bit of that award tonight. So I appreciate that too. So I just want to say one last thing is a shout out to Joe if you're out there somewhere. Hope you get well soon.
Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Webster. I appreciate it. Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo Mr. Webster's words and say you did a great job under the circumstances. It does look easier from back here. Trust me, I've been up there once and that was enough, at least for that time. But I just want to say happy Veterans Day this Thursday to all the veterans here. And also it's deep to my heart because it's my grandma's 100th birthday, Dolores, on this Thursday. So I'll be wishing her a happy birthday along with many other people on 100 of them. So thank you.
Happy birthday, and thank you to Ms. Vaughn and Clerk Gummel for being there with me for your support. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as well, I think I commend you for the job you did up there, and I know it's not easy. It's a lot of different world sitting over here. Just keep in mind, you see what the conundrum was about being on Zoom and roll calls. I sure hope we don't go to the Zoom on a regular basis because this is a direct result of the chaos it causes. Thank you.
Mr. Hoffman.
Quick question for the legal. If we have one person on Zoom, couldn't we go to them and ask their vote and then do a show of hands for the rest of us that are here?
See
Go ahead, Ms. Vaughn, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the issue with that is the people who are viewing this on YouTube or in person, we want to make sure that they hear the people on Zoom if they say yes or no, if they have questions. So it's just to make the record clear. So that's why we always recommend roll call votes, even though it takes a lot of time.
So it's more for the person calling in than anybody else.
Correct.
They need to show up.
Can I entertain a motion to adjourn? Well, I got a motion by Ms. Crosby, a second by Mr. McCarthy. All those in favor? Aye. Motion to adjourn.